Hey, guys, tonight we'll sneak up to the open plain, where the sky is so big and the wind has teeth. You stand on the rutted main street of a brand-new border town, where the planks are half-nailed and the signs are still crooked. The first real winter storm rolls, then like a slow white wand, snowflakes will sting your cheeks. This feeling will only last for 3 seconds, and then it will turn into a personal grudge. You already know that if this is true, no matter how strong you think you are very likely to not survive tonight. So before you feel comfortable, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video, but only if you really enjoy what I'm doing here. Then, write down your location and local time in the comments, so that we know where in the world you are pretending to freeze with us. Now, dim the lights or turn on the fan to emit a soft background hum. Let's embark on tonight's journey together with ease. The small town around you is not really a small town at all. Several wooden storefronts were facing the wind, with their windows rattling. In the distance are small wooden houses and solitary lanterns in the distance. Each one is a warm promise. It was at the end of the 19th century that thousands of immigrants, lured by cheap land and homestead laws, flooded into the Great Plains. They plowed the land and built a wall, but the weather remained indifferent. Tonight, a fierce snowstorm hit, as if this land had been remembered long before the fence. You pull your coat tighter and feel how the cold penetrates through it. But anyway, at that time, winter clothes were usually made of wool, leather, and if you were lucky, there might even be some fur. No high-minus-ek insulation, no waterproof zippers. Frost crept into the seams. The wind discovers every crevice as if it had a personal grudge. Everyone here knows that once it starts to snow, the small town will shrink. The world has become nothing but a wall behind which you can hide before it gets dark. You left the street and walked towards a small wooden house. The boots crunched on the hard snow. The air was filled with the smell of smoke coming from hundreds of chimneys. A pungent smell of rain emanated from the never-dried green wood. It was already afternoon, but as the storm intensified, the sky grew in. You heard someone telling a child to go in quickly. A brave dog decided, in fact, today is strict indoor weather. Even the horses were huddled together with their backs to the wind, as if they knew more than humans. When you pushed open the cabin door, a sudden change in sound surrounded you. Outside, the wind is howling. Inside, it was drowned out by a low hum, as if a giant were breathing outside the wall. Your eyes are but a lamp and a flickering flame. A family is ready to face the long days and nights. At this time, people don't sleep for a full 8 hours and wake up refreshed. They went to bed very late, woke up to watch over the fire, whispered to each other, and then went back into what they called a second sleep on the wooden bolt by the door. A thick buffalo robe was tightly hung by old smoke. This is your first odd little detail tonight. For years, hunters and merchants have been dragging such robes, using them as blankets, cloaks, and even emergency doors when the wind attempts to seep in through cracks. Its skin is thick and the fur is rough, wrapped inside. You feel that you are half human and half naked. You may seem ridiculous, but you will also feel the first real barrier between your body and the cold air passing through each wall panel. If you take a look at the roughly nailed calendar on the wall, this date might remind you of the famous storms that people later named unrecorded. There was a legendary winter of 1886 and 1887 when a herd of cattle froze to death on an open pasture. The snowstorm of January 1888, sometimes also referred to as the children's snowstorm, was a sudden snowstorm that trapped children in a room, a school building, and the vast prairie outside. These winter stories pass from one person's mouth to another, turning every storm into a memory and a warning. Historians are still debating whether people underestimated whether these snowstorms were due to optimism, ignorance, or merely the cruel randomness of life on the frontier. The floor beneath your feet is very cold, and you can feel it through your boots. You notice that the sleeping areas have all been marked. A rope was tied beside the stove, with damp mittens and socks hanging on it. In a corner, a straw-tick mattress was waiting, rough and simple, with a patchwork quilt folded under its feet. Even though it's already afternoon now, there are still people busy with it, shaking the blankets to ensure that everything is in place when night falls and the temperature drops from tragic to dangerous. Someone picked up a small iron from the fire, not for ironing clothes but for heating until it felt very hot to the touch. Then wrap it in a cloth and stuff it at the foot of the bed to prevent your toes from turning into small ice cubes. If there were an iron, perhaps there would be a brick or a bottle filled with hot water, and then tied up with cloth so that it wouldn't catch fire. It's not charming, but it's the difference between comfortably swinging your feet and painfully waking up. You listen as the wind crashes the fragments of snow and ice against the walls of the hut. The logs crackled. For a moment, you imagine you want to sleep outside, but your brain says no. Outside, you'll be very lucky if you can hold on for a few hours. Here, even in a cramped room, sleep can suddenly become an achievement. This is not merely rest, but survival. You check around for cracks in the walls and fill the gaps with rags or extra moss. A joking comment was circulating in the air saying, "How could you sleep standing up, nailed to the wall by the wind?" The laughter was a bit faint, but very helpful. Night comes very early, almost rudely. At this moment, you can clearly see the face. Next, they were merely in the shape of the orange firelight and the pale halo of an oil lamp. People finish housework faster than usual. The animals were inspected. The door was locked, and the curtains whirred wrong in the dim light. You will feel that time has lengthened and become softer. Without electric lights or glowing screens, time becomes blurred. The body began to follow the old rhythm again, feeling drowsy simply because the world turned dark. By the time everyone was ready to sleep, the storm outside had already turned into a living thing. You can hear it howling around the eaves, and when it finds new cracks, you can feel a slight chill. You were lying in bed, except for several layers of boots wrapped around you. The mattress rustled. There is a smell of smoke, well, and a faint smell of soap in the quilt. For a moment, your nose would be pricked by the cold air, but as you sank deeper under the covers, your breathing warmed this small space. The flame turned into red coal and was still burning. Somewhere outside the wall, the small town vanished into a sea of white. However, in this small room, your eyelids droop, your breathing slows down, and you start to wander, half listening and half dreaming. In winter, I press my face against the glass and wait. Outside, the snowstorm continued to rage through the small town, with snow piling up in various shapes and everything that wasn't mailed in creaky. You return to the cold and feel how fast the snow is falling, and you hide in the next place. You will find a low building half buried underground. At first you thought it was a pile of frozen soil, because to some extent it really is. A thatched cottage was waiting here, small and stubborn. Facing the storm, it seemed there was nothing to prove. You bent down and crossed the door, feeling a different kind of coldness. It's not the bone-minus chilling wind, but the thick, earthy chill clinging to your clothes. The wall is made by cutting the grassland grass into long strips and stacking them like bricks. The grass roots are still united through them. In some homesteads, people cut down tens of thousands of heavy wooden blocks to build a home. This is all because there are few trees on the open plains and wood is too expensive to transport. This is an obvious historical fact in life here. If you want a house, build it where your shovel can reach. Once your eyes get used to it, you will see that the ceiling is very low and a tall person has to bury his head. Rafters made of any wood that can be begged for, bought or picked up, can support more turf. In summer, this helps to keep the temperature lower. In winter, this is a mixed bag. Roof insulation. Yes, but it also likes to take snow as a hobby. It is piled up on top, melted by the heat inside, and then re-frozen. From time to time, a small piece of melted soil would think that gravity was their best friend and then fall into the room. You soon realized that sleeping under this roof meant accepting the fragments of last summer that the ceiling sometimes gently sprinkled on you. In the corner, there was a cast iron stove blowing, and the furnace wound its way through the wall. Its heat can only reach such a distant place, just like a small sun in a person's solar system. The closer your bed is to it, the more comfortable you will feel. The farther away you are, the more like smoke the air you exhale will be. People learn to arrange their sleeping places very carefully. A tray or a draft tagged can be pushed against the inner wall, lined with quilts and old coats. Another bedroll might be stuffed under a small attic, where the rising heat is collected enough for you to climb up a shaky ladder. Your foot touched something by the door. This is a spoonful of frozen snow, blowing into the cracks in the frame that did not fully cover the wall. The people living here placed a broom nearby specifically for night invasions. When you turn your back to it, you will wake up and find a small patch of snow on your toes. This is absurd, but somewhat impressive, as if the storm politely sent its sample in. Passing the small town, you step into a simple wooden cabin, the kind that often appears in many old photos. You'll soon notice the difference. Resonant wood smoke have a stronger flavor. The walls feel more solid. The logs piled up together were sprinkled with clay, lime, or any mixture of soil and straw, which someone could stuff into the crevices. In some areas, cabins like these are basic entry packages for the border. It is usually 16 feet by 18 feet in size, with a family living there. There might also be 1 or 2 hired workers. If the weather is too bad, a few chickens will be raised occasionally. If you have ever complained about the cramped apartment, your past self might now gently pat you on the shoulder. The roof above was made of wood, sometimes covered with tiles and sometimes split by hand. Snow also gathered there, piling up around the chimney. Every brook makes you look up. People were telling stories of rainstorms washing away rooftops and heavy snowflakes, directly hitting sleeping families. This thought makes the simple act of lying down feel like a trivial act of bravery. Historians are still debating whether the immigrants were fully prepared for these dangers, or whether the demand for land and the impetus for rapid construction made them rush to build and believe in luck. On one wall, what you see is not glass but a window covered with oiled paper. Glass was expensive and difficult to transport, especially during the early waves of settlement. So people brush oil on paper to make it -transparent and or weather-resistant. In this way, it can emit a soft and hazy light during the day. At night, it turns into another cold panel and must be covered with a blanket to keep the inside warm. When a strong wind blows, the paper trembles and makes a faint drumbeat. When you feel like sleeping, this is no comfort. On the ceiling of a corner, a strange detail catches your eye. Someone hung a rope there, with several strips of bacon and several bundles of herbs hanging on it. The air here is very dry and it can also be used as a pantry. You imagine yourself asleep, with the smell of bacon and sage wafting onto your pillow. Theoretically, it is comfortable, but if you go to bed on an empty stomach, it will actually be a bit painful. Frontier design really likes the line between being helpful and being rude. You stepped outside once again, tightened your coat and walked to a place that looked more refined. A frame house was built here, made of wooden boards painted once, and then affected by the weather. As the railway crossed the west, bringing a large amount of wooden supplies, such houses became increasingly common. Indoors, the rooms are sometimes separated. The staircase wings its way up to the second floor, and people are proud of the small comforts, such as the separate bedroom. However, when it's nose and the temperature drops, even the brightest houses will suddenly feel as thin as a box of matches. In the front room, a narrow bed was leaning against the inner wall, filled with home-made quilts, down quilts and patched bed sheet. You touched the wall behind it, and felt a faint tremor brought by a gust of wind. Here, the trick lies in layering. The mattress might be stuffed with corn husks or feathers. It is covered with a wool blanket and funnel sheets. If someone is generous, it might even be a quilt bought from a high-end store. Each layer can retain more air. Each layer means that you are less likely to wake up feeling that your nose belongs to someone else. The roof of this room is paved with wooden planks and shingles, but you can still hear the sound of snow sliding across it. Sometimes, during a violent fall, the accumulated items would further isolate the house, and the residents secretly hoped that it would remain unchanged. At other times, thaw would make it lie down, turn it into a huge, thin sheet and hit the ground. It wakes one up suddenly and makes one's heart race. Imagine you are lying in bed, half asleep and half awake, trying to tell whether the sound is snow falling from the roof or something worse. You consider that insomnia at the forefront might occasionally be caused by a simple question. What is that? As night fell, the lanterns were lowered and the blinds were drawn tight. The building that looked solid during the day turned into a small wooden shell in the swirling night. Every log cabin, thatched cottage and framed house was playing its own music of streams, creaks and sighs. People rolled onto the beds, pulled the quilts down to their chins, and listened to the sound of themselves falling asleep. In one place, soil fell from the turf ceiling onto the pillows. In another painting, feathers frost along the inner side of the window. In another place, a thin wall vibrated in the wind like a drum. 3 homes, 3 different ways to withstand the cold. In every painting, there is someone quietly closing their eyes. The night grew darker, as if someone had covered the entire sky with another blanket. The interior of the center of the universe is neither a table nor a stove. This is a bed. You can sense it by observing people's actions. Everything slowly moves around that point, where warmth is stored, hoping you can fall asleep. On the plane, there were no electric blankets, no heated mattress pads, only a lot of stubborn creativity and a somewhat panicked respect for how cold the weather could be. You stand by the bedside and realize that it doesn't look like furniture, but more like a small personal fortress. Start from the bottom. The frame might be made of wood and will stick together when someone sits down. The ropes were tied back and forth, and the slats were hurriedly nailed together. On top of it was a thick mattress, a large cloth bag filled with straw, hay or corn husks. Every time someone shifts gears, it rustles like a field. If this family does well, there might be a feather bed on top, but uneven, made from the feathers of chickens and geese plucked over the years. A genuine feather bed is a classic and, cutting mine, essential luxury item. It's so soft that it makes you immerse yourself in it and temporarily forget everything outside. The temperature is very low. The most important insulating layer is the fur. The buffalo robe spread on the mattress can immediately provide insulation. Their skin is thick, their fur is long, and their smell carries a vague memory of smoke and open grasslands. For decades, hunters and merchants have been selling these robes. Even at the end of this century, when the large number of cattle herds decreased, many families still cherished at least one. A definite historical fact is that by the 1882s, Busan had almost vanished from most of the plains, along with an easier source of this sleep armor. Your clothes might have been patched up and worn thin on one side, but when you wipe them with your hand, you can feel the difference. This is no cute decoration. This is survival in fur. There is a quilt parade on the fur. The patchwork quilt burst into all kinds of colors that the family could assemble. It's too old and worn out, yet too precious to be discarded. Old shirts, old skirts and old aprons have turned into small fabric memories, sewn into new patterns. By the end of the 19th century, irregularly shaped and brightly embroidered crazy quilts had become popular in some families, especially in places where magazines brought fashionable designs and creativity. Each quilt takes several months or years to complete. Put together on a quiet night, the hands still want to be busy. If you squint your eyes, you might find a fragment that was once a baby dress or your favorite work shirt. This is like sleeping under one's own history. When someone lifts a corner of the quilt to show you what's inside, a strange detail will emerge. You will see a thin layer of cotton fluff, made from old newspapers, catalog pages, and even cigar shreds. People use all their things to add a little insulation. To some families, there is such a story the hair on the comb is kept and sewn into the padding to add warmth and personal charm. Although not everyone would admit to taking a nap under such a private thing, historians are still debating whether the quilt was mainly a practical shield to keep warm or a quiet display of creativity and status. It proves that even in difficult places, beauty has a stubborn side. It's your turn to get ready for sleep now. The first surprise is that you seldom change your clothes. There's no central heating, so taking off your pajamas sounds like a prank. You might put on a woolen Union uniform, which is an all-and-1 undergarment worn by farmers, cowboys and town residents. It has long sleeves, long legs and usually a set of buttons, looking like it comes from those who trust the weather too much. Sometimes there is that notorious seat behind it. Try not to imagine that you are still fiddling with it at 3 in the morning. Although technically speaking room temperature can be regarded as thin ice, wearing a pajama or even yesterday's shirt over the underwear. For many people, no piece of clothing is specifically designed for sleeping. Clothes cycle through household chores, then become layering items on the bed, and finally turn into rags and quilt fragments. Red flannel is popular not only because the dye is easy to obtain, but also because people believe that red wool has a special health minus beneficial warming effect. This is like a wearable superstition, a warm cousin of energy drink advertisements. No one can measure whether colors are really helpful. If you still think so when you are shivering, that's almost it. Feet have received special attention. In colder regions, thick knitted socks are sometimes worn in pairs. Many families make special bed socks. These socks will never be inside the boots, which can make the socks cleaner and not too hard. When you slide your feet down to feel the concentrated warmth, the hot stones or bricks heated by the stove are wrapped in cloth and waiting at the bottom of the bed. This is like discovering a medieval ankle brace that you have never ordered. Just don't forget where it is and kick it hard when you sleep. Unless you enjoy being awakened by sudden pain, your head also needs to be covered. Without modern insulation materials, a large amount of heat would be lost. This is the origin of the classic eintite, a soft long hat or a tied hat to prevent the ears from getting cold. The eintite is not just a cartoon joke. This is standard indoor winter equipment. Men, women and children all use some versions, which is usually the last thing you do before getting into bed. If your hair is very delicate, you may also be struggling to protect your hairstyle, which means that when you wake up, you don't look much like you were fighting with a pillow in a wrestling match. Once everyone is stratified, climbing into bed becomes a small strategic operation. The bed might have been warmed up by another person. If you are the one who has to get up to look after the stove, it feels magical but a bit unfair. It is very strenuous to get under furs, quilts and blankets. You lift, slide, sway, and finally settle down, trapped in the best place. The weight gently presses on you, on your arms, and making you roll requires planning. It feels a bit like being stuffed into the fabric of concrete, comfortable, safe, and unable to go anywhere. You can imagine how modern people complain when their down comforters are too heavy. They have no idea what it's like to have a luxurious burrito. Under all this, the air you breathe begins to warm up, climate control that forms a small pocket on your face. In the cocoon, you hear the low sounds in the room, the movement of wood in the stove, the calm breathing, and perhaps the slight snoring that you pretend not to notice. Above you, the ceiling has its own secrets. Somewhere in the mattress, a scattered piece of straw poked you, enough to remind you that perfection has not yet reached this point. However, as your body's heat gradually seeps into every layer of your body, the drowsy comfort begins to win the argument. The night still goes on. People might wake up for an hour, whisper to each other, and then doze off again. They might briefly stand up to add some fuel to the fire and then slide back into the equally warm hole in the mattress. Historians are still debating whether this segmented first sleep and second sleep pattern is widespread in such communities, or if many people just take a casual break during the intervals of doing housework. No matter what the current debate is, you feel very sleepy and don't care much about the theory. You curled up your toes on the warm stone, adjusted your sleeping cap, and listened to the sound of the storm roaring somewhere outside. Quilts, furs, flannel wrapped in layers of fabric, history, and stubborn human improvisations. You close your eyes, and the weight of winter gently presses you into a dream. When you first saw this bed tonight, you thought it belonged to someone. Then the reality of the boundary began to quietly line up beside it. Extra pillows have appeared. A small tray at the feet peeked out from under the frame. Suddenly you will understand that this is more of a group project than a bed. Heat is a rare currency here. Privacy is a discounted commodity forgotten on the carriage. You stand in a small wooden house, where a family has crammed their entire lives into one room. The parents occupied the middle mattress, but when everyone was getting ready to sleep, the children crawled in from all sides like stubborn little cats. A small corpse was stuck among the adult penguins. Another curled up at the foot of the warm stone, and the third curled up at the edge, sticking to the side of the stone like a sleeping barnacle. Here, it's quite normal for several teenagers to share a bed when they are in their teens. There is no extra space and no extra mattress. To be honest, more corpses mean more warmth. You watch them settle down. There is a way to deal with this chaos. The youngest children were placed where they wouldn't roll out. Those who kick their legs in their sleep will be pushed under heavier quilts. Children who always feel hot are given the least quilts and become living radiators for everyone else. You can't help but think that this is the original human space heater subscription plan. A visiting uncle spread out a blanket on the floor beside the stove. He said he liked it there because he could get his morning coffee right away. But once a fire broke out, it was also the warmest place. The hired workers might share that makeshift bed. Each of them wrapped themselves in their own blanket and tucked their boots beside their heads so that they wouldn't feel as cold as stones when they woke up in the morning. This is not comfort in the modern sense. It is merely a shelter and a shared breathing space. The body captures the excess heat in the room. In some farmhouses, you will see different arrangements. The rope beds with frames wound along the walls, each layer rougher than the last. The big boy crowded in one berth and the little boy crowded in another. They sleep with their heads facing their feet, so their cold noses are pressed against their warm ankles. And any midnight conversation revolves around someone's knees. If you have ever complained about sharing a hotel room with someone else, imagine sleeping with your brother's toes. At the border, it was only Tuesday. After a while, you walked to a more crowded place, a shabby boarding apartment along the stage route. Travelers come and go, and so does the hope of personal space. Upstairs in a long room, several beds are lined up in a row, with only a box or a chair in between. On a stormy night, when all the beds were filled up, the overflow plan was simple. 2 people share one mattress. If there is still not enough space, someone offers what is called half a bed for half a night. One person slept from dusk till midnight and then got up under the pretext of looking after the stove or something like that, while the other sneaked into the warm cave they had left behind. This is an economic system, and at the same time, it is a somewhat awkward social experiment. A strange detail caught your eye. A piece of rope was hanging from a nail above a bed in the boarding apartment. Travelers who can't afford a full bed might spend money to sit down and sleep. Their bodies leaned forward on the rope, and their weight hung down on it. This practice is more known in cities, but ideas spread along with people, and so does the habit of thrift. You imagine dozing off with a clothesline in the midst of a snowstorm, and then deciding never to complain about your economy class seat again, along the path at the cow camp. This arrangement is even more fundamental. The cowboys spread out the sheets closely by the fire. Sometimes, for efficiency, they would fold the edges of the blankets together. Your bed is the saddle under your head. Your raincoat is wrapped around you, and your blanket is rolled up beneath and above you. The men cursed the cold in a low voice, but they also knew it best not to disperse. Approaching objects mean sharing heat. Besides, no one wants to be the one who wakes up to find that coyotes are interested in isolated sleepers. Historians are still debating whether the image of a solitary cowboy under a solitary tree is mainly a romantic story, or whether many nights look more like a crowded overnight dweller. Jokes can help relieve tension. Some people complain that the snoring of the person beside them is like a freight train, but they are reminded that at least snoring proves they are still alive and can still warm the air. For another person pulled his hat down to cover his eyes, claiming that his hat strap was the only thing that kept his mind from freezing. Laughter rippled through the crowd and then vanished as people fell into a half-minor state between wakefulness and dreams, where the crackling of fire mingled with the sound of the wind. In the railway berths, you will see rows of narrow beds to 2-3 stories high, with men climbing up warily. Gang labor on the railway tracks brings together strangers from different backgrounds. They threw their coats onto the hooks, took off their boots, and then climbed onto the stalls assigned to them. Some people cover their mouths with scarves to block out the smell of old smoke and unwashed wool. Some others just fainted sideways. Here, sharing a bed is not as common as in family cabins, but the distance is still quite close. The coughing sound from the other end of the room echoed in the phone. A restless dreamer will shake the entire framework. When the strong wind blows, the building itself will groan. Not all shared beds are unisex. The social rules at that time stipulated who could sleep where and with whom, at least in public. The dormitory manager's family tries to keep men and women in separate rooms as much as possible. Families choose sleep groups based on age and gender. However, when the storm is severe enough and space is limited, ideal rules sometimes give way to practical arrangements. A sick neighbor might be brought in, placed beside the fire and wrapped around others. Travelers who encounter a storm may be squeezed into a corner of the mattress. Everyone politely pretended that it was very ordinary. Historians are still debating whether frontier communities really relaxed their standards in emergencies, or if later storytellers simply enjoyed drama. Lice, bedbugs and fleas don't care about these at all. You noticed a woman boiling linen in a kettle earlier that day, trying to control the pest. On a rare sunny day, the mattress was dragged outside, beaten with a stick, and then left there to freeze to death, hoping that the bone-minus chilling cold would kill those things that had bitten people at night. Sometimes it's effective. Sometimes bugs take it as a light-minus-hearted vacation. If you share a bed with someone else here, you have to accept the fact that you might wake up tickling. This is a discounted rent brought by an unpopular roommate. When you look around, you will feel how the distance between people is shrinking as the temperature drops. Warmth becomes a collective achievement. The quiet breathing of others, the shared weight of the quilt, and the simple comfort of not being alone in the darkness, all of which blend together. You slide into a narrow space at the edge of a crowded mattress, feeling the faint dripping of straw, the squeeze on someone's shoulder nearby, and the faint smell of wool, smoke and human life. The storm is roaring outside. Inside, the body lines up in a row, like a small crack, a resolute army fighting against the cold. When your eyes become heavy and your thoughts drift, you lend your heat to your career. The true ruler of the winter night is neither the sheriff nor the tavern owner. It's fire. You will have this feeling when you walk into a room and the first thing everyone sees is not the door or the table, but the stove. Their eyes swept over the orange light behind the fireplace, or the glow at the bottom of the iron belly, just like everyone is quietly checking the heat of the house. In a small room, an open fireplace almost occupies the entire wall. Rough stones make up it. A log crackled inside the house, sending sparks into the chimney and heating them outward in an unbalanced wave. The family once relied on such a fireplace as the center of their life. Cooking, warmth and light all come from the same dancing flame. You will think how nice it is to stand closer and offer a toast to your hand, but you also notice that your back still felt cold. The fireplace uses half of its energy to heat the sky. Next door, a person who came to the border later showed a cast-iron box furnace. This is not elegant. It is a sturdy black metal rectangle with a pipe that bends upwards and outward. When it burns well, it radiates heat in all directions, turning itself into a little sun. Families in border areas adopt this type of stove once they can afford it, as they use less fuel and deliver more heat into the room. This technology can change the night more than any luxurious living room equipment. You leaned towards the stove and felt a steady and deep warmth that seemed to reach right to your bones. Someone used a hook tool to open the lid, put in another log, and then carefully fixed it in place, so that in areas where wood is scarce, air can flow around them. That burned twisted tree roots, bark and any waste wood they could find. On the plain with few trees, people dried up the water, buffalo meat slices and beef pot rise and neatly piled them up by the door, but the stacking was a bit awkward. You never thought you would be standing in a room heated by leftovers from herbivores. And here you are, your cheeks warmed by the strangest fuel source in your mind. Even if the fire is very strong, the heat is very fragile. Wood burns fast. Coal, if available, burns at a higher temperature and for a longer time. But this will cost money and must be dragged over. You see someone in the house picking up a fire stick and dragging coal into a glowing mound of earth. They scattered ashes on it and let the embers burn slowly. This is what is called a fire pile. If you do it right, you can keep your secret coal raise until morning. If you make a mistake, you either suffocate completely or let it explode and waste yourself before the coldest moment arrives. No one believes that fire can die out on its own without supervision. You listen as the family quietly assigns the night shift. One person will wake up around midnight to check the stove, while the other will wake up at dawn. Sometimes they exchange evenings. Sometimes the same unfortunate soul can become a permanent firefighter because they were already sleeping very lightly. Hitting the last straw for this job means you've won a trip to get out of bed, which feels like being in a frozen milk bucket. Congratulations. You are the walking thermostat. When you take responsibility for the first time, you will feel every step. You rolled out of bed, put your coat over your pajamas, and then stuffed your feet into the cold boots, tucking up your toes. The room was pitch-dark, with only a faint orange light coming from the stove. Your breath is like a pale cloud. For a moment, you just stood there, lost in your sleep, trembling, trying to remember which pile of wood had been dry and which one was smoking like a campfire prank. You opened the stove door and saw that the coal lumps had turned into a pile of dark red stuff, just barely alive. You gently poked, inserted a small stick, and then another one. The wood slowly grabbed, eliminating the small iron chamber. Flames spread along the bark. With the metal casing of the furnace heated up again, lumps formed in the furnace. Outside, the wind is blowing against the walls. Inside, you hear the quiet changes in the room, and warmth begins to seep out again. It's invisible, but very real. A strange little custom came into view. In some families, a pot of water is placed on the stove to moisten the air and prevent the throat from drying out. Some people might put a pinch of mint or spruce needle inside to turn the room into an unexpected humidifier at a very low -cost aroma through some bar. Sometimes a stone or a brick is permanently placed beside the fire, ready to be reheated before going to bed and wrapped up for warmth. You put one of them beside the coal pile, thinking that the person with cold feet would be grateful to you later. In a house with only a fireplace, this job is even more difficult. It's not easy to keep an open flame, so people let big pieces of wood burn down, hoping that there will still be some coal under the ashes. Getting up at night usually means gently blowing on that faint red light, coaxing it back to life like a stubborn child. If you fail, you must start from the beginning, split the fire with your sleepy hands, and strike a flint or a match when your fingers go numb. Historians are still debating whether stoves really made winter sleep very easy everywhere, or whether diaries exaggerated their impact because people liked anything that could keep them warm. Risk hovers on the edge of the light. When the cream in the chimney accumulates, the chimney will catch fire. If someone keeps the furnace door open for too long, the sparks may end in the wrong place. In a tightly sealed shelter or an air-raid shelter with poor air circulation, smoke and fumes can crawl back inside. People in the 19th century were aware of some of the dangers, but not all. They talk about bad air and headaches, and sometimes they don't even know what's going on in their lungs at night. Maintaining a quiet balance between a warm room and not poisoning everyone in it will make you feel respected. Night after night, this pattern repeats itself. The last person awake checked the fire again, listening to the burning sound and feeling the steady heat on his skin. Whenever possible, every household will move their beds closer to the stove. The children were queuing up in the warmest spot near the inner wall. The elderly and anyone who is ill should take refuge in the place closest to the fire scene, where the cold air is not easy to reach. The order of who sleeps where is not merely a habit. This is a silent list, on which it is written who needs warmth the most. Finally, it's your turn again. You woke up in a daze. The room was dim and the sound of the storm was like a low growl. You swayed your legs along the edge of the bed, and under the faint glow of the fire, you gently walked across the floor towards the stove. When you opened the door, the coal lumps winked at you like sleepy eyes. You fed them a little more fuel, pushed them back, and felt the first warm breeze brush past your face. This is neither dramatic nor heroic, but on such nights, it is precisely this small maintenance that enables everyone to sleep peacefully instead of waking up trembling. You closed the furnace door, listening to the dripping sound of the metal expanding, tiptoe back to your position. The mattress greets you with the shape left by your body, still slightly warm. Outside, blizzards are constantly rewriting the landscape, with snow piling up around the walls and rooftops. Inside, a small iron box preserves a piece of winter. You curled up in the bed, your skin still stinging from that brief cold journey, allowing the regained warmth to bring you back to your dreams, while the fire hummed quietly in the center of the room. The snow kept falling until the whole world was filled. When you open the door, the first thing you notice is not just the cold. This is the way the sound disappears. It's as if someone is looking down at the entire grassland with their hand. The wind was still roaring, but everything else was quiet. With a slight creaking sound, the footsteps sank into the snow. Horses exhale, but the sound they make almost immediately swallows them down. Try to shout out as an experiment, and hear your own voice being shortened by the snowflakes, chopped up by the snowflakes, and dragged into the white snow. Coast the cabin door and feel the changes in the cabin. The wall is not thick, but the snow pressing on it forms an insulating layer. Each time we drifted along the logs and each pile leaned against the window frame, an additional layer of silence was added. It was as if the storm had wrapped up the house and stuffed it inside. Inside, the only remaining sounds were the crackling of fire, the occasional squeaking of wood, and the gentle footsteps of someone straightening the quilt. It gives people an inexplicable sense of security, just like your own little boat floating on the cold and peaceful sea. You lay in bed and listen for a while. In summer, you will hear insects, the wheels of carriages and the voices outside. On a clear winter night, you might hear the sharp cries of a coyote. In such a heavy snowfall, the outside world shrank into a blurry roar, distant and dull. When there is nothing to hold on to, sleep comes faster. There is no noise to distract you. This is almost a luxury until you remember that here, silence is not always your friend. By morning, the evidence had arrived. When you push the door open, it hardly moves. The snow was blowing fiercely on the other side of the house. The piles kept piling up higher and higher, blocking the way in. Someone smiled weakly and joked, "You are living here now. Congratulations on obtaining permanent residency." You pick up the shovel and dig from inside. A ridiculous little tunnel allows snowballs to slide into the room. Frozen crystals are sprayed on your boots. Your breathing became blurred in the cold that rushed in through the hole. You realize that if no one gets up early, this family might be locked down for a long time. The white blanket that masked the sound once tried to wipe away the door. Windows are not spared the same fate. You walk to a painful place where you can see nothing but a uniform white wall pressing against the glass. The light in the room became dim and strange. Day and night start to blur, so you will check your clock more frequently. In some families, people actually welcome the snow pasted on the outside of the wall because it can block the airflow and prevent the wind from blowing in through every crack. They even shoveled more snow on the foundation to build up the house. It's as if nature gave them free insulating materials, and they happily piled them up higher. Historians are still debating whether this practice really saved a great deal of fuel, or whether it mainly made people feel safer in an environment with little cooperation. There is a trap here. The more snow accumulates, the more the house looks like a small cave. The smoke must be discharged through chimneys or pipes, which may now be level with the mountain top. If the opening is blocked by ice or snow, smoke will sneak in. People talk about bad air and headaches, and about rooms that feel heavy to breathe in. They don't have the modern term for carbon monoxide, but they know that poorly ventilated fires can make people sick and sometimes keep them awake. You'll soon understand that the storm that plunges a house can also cover its nose. This influence becomes even stronger in air-minus raid shelters and semi-minus underground so-doers. You climb down and enter one of the Earth's homes, feeling the weight of the surrounding hills. The entrance is a short, sloping passage with a very low door. In a snowstorm, snow will fill the tunnel lakes and in an hourglass. The people inside might only be known when they disappear during the day and the air becomes murky. Their family might take turns using any tool they can fit into the space to scrape through the blockage. Others had to tap on the roof for help, hoping that their neighbors would hear a deep sound during the storm. On the vast grassland, you see the other side of the snow blanket. When the air is still and the sky is clear, the surface of the snow reflects sounds in strange ways. There is a story that people hear the sound of a carriage or train several miles away as if it were rolling right beside them, because the sound travels across the hard crust. Then, in the next storm, the same world fell silent. The bell from outside the barn hardly reached the house. The cries for help might disappear a few steps away from the porch. Historians are still debating whether these stories are accurate depictions of sound quirks, or whether memory and storytelling have made them more dramatic. To cope with this, people have invented some small tricks. You follow a farmer who ties a rope from the house to the barn and not sit on the pillars at both ends. When he needs to take care of animals in the snowy weather, you will hold onto the rope and walk hand in hand in the flying snow. Without it, he might be circling a few yards away from his home. In the pitch-black midnight, Even the flame of the lantern seemed not to know which direction to lean. The same rope guided him back there. You imagine yourself trying to find a toilet in the chaos, silently thanking the indoor pipes for their existence in your lifetime. Indoors, the snow piled up against the wall changed everyone's way of sleeping. The sound was so faint that the usual clues vanished. A traveler might wake up in panic because the wind has turned into a distant hum and lost his way. Children sometimes describe this feeling as being buried along with the house. Some people feel very comfortable and fall asleep easily. Others stared at the ceiling, imagining the snow getting heavier and heavier until it crushed the roof. When you look up at the beam of the house and listen to the sound of the stream, which may be normal or abnormal, you can also feel the faint echo of this thought yourself. The darkness is also playing with the mind. Because the window is blocked, the lamp burns for a longer time, but the oil is limited, so the flame is often set very low. The room is in a permanent haze. People tend to sleep a little longer, fall asleep at noon, or wake up at strange times because their bodies cannot fully determine what time it is now. From the diary of the long winter, it can be seen that in those days, the only way to record was to eat and do housework. You can imagine completely forgetting Monday. The weekend has become a theoretical concept, just like eating summer melon or taking a hot bath. Not everyone regards snowfall merely as a problem. It can see children carving their sleeping niches into piles on a homestead. In the small snow cave, blankets were spread out. They challenged each other and sat there listening. The air in these pockets becomes quiet and sealed, just like the inside of a shell. This is a strange little game, but it also taught them where the dangers lie. If one stays for too long and forgets the thinness of the air, play will turn to something else. Parents kept a close watch and called their children back before the cold and silence persuaded them to stay. When night falls again, you pull the quilt tighter, allowing your ears to adapt to the remaining sounds of the storm. Snow enveloped the entire building, squeezing into every corner and blocking every crevice it could find. The result was a strange peace. Now you can hardly hear any news. There are its own little bubbles and hot air in the room, the faint ticking of the cooling metal on the stove, the gentle breathing of the sleeping people around you, and your own heartbeat all become the loudest sounds in your world. You realize that deep in your mind, there is a great deal of snow above your head and around you. If there is any change, the same weight can soften every kind of noise, or it to become tough and ruthless. However, drowsiness also has its severity. Ptosis of the eyelids and muscle relaxation. Silence no longer seems like a threat. It feels as if a thick white curtain has fallen between you and everything else. Exhale. Let your thoughts slow down with the snowflakes falling from outside and fall asleep quietly in the snow-covered house. The lights of the town gradually faded behind you until they were just a hint in the darkness. You rode out with a group of oxen, your hooves crunching on the snow, and both the horses and the riders exhaled hot air. No one would choose this season just for fun. You came here because of the existence of the cows, and the cows simply don't care about your sleep time. A storm swept through the open pasture, and you realized that your bedroom had no walls at all tonight. The deer herd moved forward slowly, their black figures set off the pale snowdrifts. From time to time a cow would snort or shake its head, annoyed by the wind. Pull your raincoat tight. That long oilcloth coat is your first line of defense against wind and snow. A clumsy but reliable shell. The brim of your hat above your eyes catches the snowflakes and blows them in all directions. You start to understand why the cowboys in so many old photos always look indifferent. If you have stayed outside for so long in winter, your expression will also default to being serious. When the boss finally called a halt to the evening's work, the routine began with not much conversation. Some riders keep their cattle in a hidden drawer and, if they can find them, use lowlands and bushes as windbreaks. Others began to collect wood, a generous word used to describe the messy branches and dried beef slices they were dragging together. In the western regions without trees, a genuine log feels like a treasure. You watch someone light a fire. Its intention is more important than its size. Feed it carefully and keep it going. Your bed at night unfolds from your saddle. A reeled embed roll is no simple blanket. It is usually a canvas bag with several wool blankets inside, and perhaps a quilt as well. Canvas can resist snow and moisture, while the inner layer can absorb heat. You spread it on a piece of ground, hoping it won't be so cold, and then shake off the blanket. The smell of smoke, horse, wet and old wool rose up. It's not fancy, but very familiar, which is very important here. You place the saddle where the pillow should be, perhaps covering it with the smooth side of a folded coat. Resting your head on something you've been sitting on all day may seem rude to your neck, but it's better than burying your face in the snow. Historically, cowboys not only used saddles as pillows, but also as safe storage places. The saddle bag under your head is unlikely to leave at night. This habit reappears time and again in people's memories of the era of the big lane. After the Civil War, thousands of cattle were transferred to routes such as the Kai-Sun Trail. Whether the boots are worn or taken off halfway depends on who you ask. Some people swear that sleeping in boots can keep their feet warmer and make it easier for cows to jump if they are frightened. Others insist on letting go of their toes and dragging them halfway so that blood circulation can be restored, because nothing can ruin a night more than realizing that your toes are optional. You loosened your hair by half, hoping the snake could take a break, because it's not the snake season now. Anyway, in this kind of weather, they are more rational than you. You get into bed, twisting your body carefully, only when you know that once you lie down, you don't want to move anymore. The canvas rustled. The blanket tickled your skin cheerfully. At that moment, the cold air contrasted with the warmth gathered around your body, creating an incredible feeling. Pull the outer layer up to your head, take a few breaths and make your own little breathing tent. Here, your body is the heater, the thermostat in the customer service department. The nearby flames crackled, small but indispensable. One person is responsible for making coffee, or perhaps boiling beans or marinating pork. Another one was assigned as the first night guard. The cattle are very nervous in the storm, and sudden noises can cause stampedes. On the Great Plains, there are many reports about winter storms and blizzards causing fatal panic among cattle herds. The famous disaster occurred in the winters of 1886 and 1887, often referred to as the Great Death. A large number of cattle were frozen to death, altering the entire region's pastures. When the snow covers your blanket, you will feel history breathing quietly here. The night watchman slowly walked around the cattle, singing in a low voice. The singing was wafting through the camp. Ancient folk songs and hymns, anything with a rhythm can calm the ox down and keep the rider awake. This is a detail that sounds very romantic until you become aware of its existence, because animals are less afraid when they hear familiar human voices. This is like having your dog with the radio on, only with more horns and hooves. Historians are still debating whether this continuous singing was as common as the legend claims, or whether later storytellers tended to do so in order to create a good image. When you approach the fire, you will notice a strange little habit. Someone poured a little hot coffee into an iron can and placed it beside a person's boot for a minute to warm his toes from the outside. It's extremely inefficient but surprisingly sweet, just like a cowboy version of spa. Others stuffed heated stones or embers wrapped in old cloth between the blankets to create temporary hotspots. This method has been effective until you make a wrong judgment and realize that you are just one nap away from having a barbecue on your personal bed. So people learn to place them carefully. Every time you stick your nose out of the canvas, snowflakes will land on your face. If the wind really blows, the croon enders can roll their beds to the left side of the carriage or onto a natural ridge. The carriage itself served as a windbreak, and its canvas covering made a creaking sound as it flapped. In some equipment, the man slept under the carriage between the wheels, where the ground was a little shaded. If you hear snoring down there, you know someone has booked a day suite. For in the clouds break, the stars burn with intense high-altitude intensity, making everything look more beautiful, but also a bit malicious. The sky seems boundless. You realize that between you and space, there is nothing but Aaron's stubbornness. Lying on the frozen ground wrapped in 3 blankets, pretending to be fine, it's a humble and somewhat ridiculous feeling. Then again, this is only half of life on the frontier. Pretend that you are fine until you are really fine. Sleep is intermittent. You are dozing off. Wake up when a gust of wind blows the snow onto your face, and then take a nap. When it's your turn to be on duty, someone gently pushes your bedspread and murmurs your name. You pull yourself out of the warm cocoon. Every fiber of yours is complaining, putting even colder boots on your cold legs. At that moment, the sky was spinning above you, black, silver, and vest. The deer herd is blowing clouds in the darkness. You mount the horse right into the emptiness of the white spots. And a tune you hardly know, just to open your own eyes. When you got back into your bed, the canvas was already covered with snow and the fire had turned into a pile of low coal lumps. You stomped your feet, shaking off everything on your body as much as possible, and then slid back into the warm cave left by your former self. Although it's very cold, it's still very comfortable in daily life. The bed roll, the saddle pillow, the hat is pulled very low, and one hand is placed outside the blanket in case you are in a hurry to get a gun or lasso. You curl up, feeling your breath start to warm the little air pockets on your face, allowing night to fall. Here, sleep is never deep or guaranteed, but it is still in small doses and sufficient. When the snow whispers in the wilderness and the cattle murmur softly in the darkness, you sit in a creaking train carriage and realize that this is a new winter problem. At least in the log cabin or air-raid shelter, the walls are fixed and unchanging. Here, everything is trembling and jingling. Snowflakes pass through the dirty window, blurring the world into a white. The car smelled a faint, sad odor of soot, wet wool and old sandwiches. You should have gone on a trip and even taken a break, but the trek and the weather had a dispute, and your body was caught in the middle. Railways changed the face of the entire continent. When the first transcontinental railway line was connected in 1816, a carriage journey that used to take weeks now only takes a few days on a train. This is an undeniable historical fact, not merely a railway advertisement. People flocked in, crossing the West in this new way. What follows is a brand minus new kind of poor sleep quality. Your seat is a narrow bench with a straight backrest that is suspiciously hard, and the padding is just enough to pretend it cares. You pulled your coat tight and felt the cold creeping up through your boots from the floor. The heater at one end of the car works at its best, but when it reaches you, the heat disappears. Snowstorms are especially bad for trains. Snowdrift spiraled up along the railway tracks, filling the pits. The locomotive can pass through some snow, but heavy snow will bring everything to a standstill. Before the wheels truly let out a screeching sound, your body first senses the deceleration. A movement changed and turned into a hesitant push. Someone muttered that there was snow ahead. In extremely harsh winters, railways would dispatch wedge-shaped plows installed on locomotives to clear the roads, or huge rotating plows that would chew up snow and rotate metal teeth. These machines are impressive, but they don't access every individual branch line, and they won't show up immediately when you are trapped in a remote area at 2 o'clock in the morning. When the train stops for too long, heat becomes a negotiation. The stove in the car needs refueling. If you are lucky, there is enough coal on board. The crew will drag the coal and the island feed it to the iron boxes. If supplies are insufficient, when the train stops in the bushes or near the station, passengers will help collect anything that might catch fire. People stomped their feet, clapped their hands and joked with each other, saying, "Yes, we were all thinking about frostbite. Thank you." You tuck your hands into your sleeves and try to curl up sideways in your seat. Look for a place where your spine won't complain and your toes can still receive blood. Night travel will bring another feature to your trip: the sleeper car. By the end of the 19th century, companies such as Pullman began to operate special carriages, where the upper berths could be folded and the lower berths could be drawn with curtains. Theoretically, this is civilized. You have bedding mattresses, and even pillows. In fact, what you get is a thin mattress, a bumpy pillow, and the pleasure of trying to fall asleep when the car is bumpy. Every snore and cough seeped through the curtains like gossip. You climbed into a narrow carriage, felt it shaking, and drew the curtain. For a moment, you will feel like you are in a small private room. Then your neighbor cleared his throat and you realized that this wall was basically made up of optimism. A strange little detail is hung on the ceiling leather strap to stabilize itself as you climb up to be. People joke that when you reach the top of the mountain, don't look down, because if the train stops too suddenly, you surely don't want to fall to the ground so soon. Some travelers insist on a low berth rate and simply refuse to climb. Others, however, vied for the upper floors, claiming that they were warmer because the heat would rise and the ventilation near the floor was poorer. Historians are still debating whether sleeper cars really made winter travel more comfortable for ordinary passengers, or whether their reputation for luxury mainly stems from advertisements and the experiences of wealthy travelers. The stagecoach offers a different kind of winter pain. You climbed into a box with high springs, and the leather suspension swayed, just like a hammock filled with resentment. In the carriage, 3 people sit on the main seats. When it's crowded, the other 3 people might sit on the folding seats facing them. Knee clashing, boot clashing, personal space has become a distant memory. When the car door closed, darkness and breathing fog filled the cabin. The only source of heat comes from the shared body and the blankets people carry with them. If someone wraps a hot brick in cloth, it becomes a hero and is passed back and forth like a sacred object. Here are written bus etiquette rules, some of which are even published in newspapers, reminding passengers not to occupy the blanket, not to step on others, and not to talk too much in the first hour, in case everyone needs time to decide who is annoying. Through the floor you can feel every rutting on the road. When the wheels hit the frozen ridge, everyone was gently thrown upwards like a tragic ballet. Sleeping here has become an art of surrender. You tilt your head to one side, get along peacefully with the shoulders of strangers, and hope that if you drool, you will never see these people again. The storm increased the delay. When the driver and passengers got off and pushed each other, the long minus-distance bus rolled or stopped in the snow. You imagine crawling into waist-minus-high snow in the middle of the night, pushing your fingers until they sting, and then crawling back to sit on the equally cold seat. Sometimes, if the road was impassable, passengers would take refuge at relay stations or pastures along the way, crowding in any corner of the floor near the stove. A train ticket does not guarantee a decent bed, yet the West is willing to remind you of this. On trains and coaches, people will improvise some sleep techniques. A scarf covering the face can block the wind. The coat turned into a blanket or a pillow. Some people propped their feet on carpet bags to keep them away from the cold floor. The children curled up on their parents' legs. Occasionally, you will see people sitting face to face. A passenger placed his boots on the knee of the passenger opposite him to keep warm. This arrangement requires more trust on public transportation than you might imagine. Circulate coffee and hard candies to keep your eyes open, because missing a stop in this scenery means walking along a frozen road. The rhythm of the wheels, either clicking on the railway tracks or roaring on the ruts, tugs at your senses. You nodded, suddenly woke up, and then nodded again. Every time you are in a daze, something always interrupts you. After a bumpy ride, the driver shouted and suddenly a hissing sound of steam came out. Outside, the winter night continues, with a hazy expanse of snow and shadows. In the car you entered a strange half-minus awake, half-minus asleep state, where dreams and the shaking of the car mingled together. You might dream that you are still moving after the train has been stationary for a long time, or even if you are standing on a solid ground, you are still bouncing around the carriage. Finally, after many starts and stops, the journey was approaching its end. When you get off the carriage or onto the platform, your legs will tremble and your back will complain in several languages. You didn't have a good rest. You will steal fragments on crowded benches and narrow berths, where the sounds of wheels and the wind can be heard. However, you still moved. You kept warm enough. You personally experienced that in the Old West, you didn't always sleep in a bed under the roof. Sometimes when winter presses its face against the window and watches you flaunt around, it appears on railways and roads like an even little fragment. You leave the cabin and the bunkhouse and head for a very different winter home. On the open plain, tall pinnacles rise up from the snow, their poles piercing the sky, and their coverings looking pale in the falling snow. These are slanted circles, slightly away from the wind. Entrances are usually kept away from the worst weather. This scene gives people a sense of common thoughtful consideration, as if every Poland wooden state clearly knows why they are there. You hid towards an entrance and even felt the change before you went in. The lower edge of the conical tent is weighted with stones and closely adheres to the ground, leaving only a carefully designed gap near the top for smoke to spray out. Whether hidden or concealed, the canvas is tightly wrapped around the pillar, forming a smooth surface that allows the snow to fall off rather than accumulate. This basic shape was improved over generations by the indigenous people on the plain, including the Lakota XIA, the Blackfoot and many other ethnic groups. This is a simple historical fact. Long before someone drove a carriage across the prairie, the people here had already been dealing with the problem of winter. Inside, the space opens up like a tall breathing shell. A flame is at the center, sending the smoke upwards to the ventilation opening at the top, where the cover can be adjusted with a baffle. Bedding and personal belongings are arranged on the circular wall. When you squat down and move to the side, you will feel how the heat around the fire and the sleeping area is reduced. The cold air drifting near the bottom is lifted by the smoke and discharge, so the air you breathe near the ground is relatively mild. It is a combination of natural ventilation and heating through countless winters. Fur and blankets create a sleeping place like a nest. The buffalo robe is thick and waterproof, and is spread on the pillow and under it. Some people lifted themselves slightly from the frozen ground with willow trees or sapling wrecks and then placed animal skins on top. Others rely on layering, piling up enough materials together so that the cold cannot reach their backs. You notice that the bedding is arranged along the curve of the wall, so everyone is facing the fire. At night, you will turn your head towards the quilt and your feet towards the flame. This way, you can share the heat and also see the center of the flame. A strange detail caught your attention. In a sleeping place, a little dog was curled up on a special piece of fur. Its status is obvious. In many indigenous camps, dogs were the working animals, pulling carts and guarding the camps in the early days. They can also serve as small household heaters. The children pulled them closer. The adults made them curl up at their feet. No one needs to explain this arrangement. A warm dog, warm toes. It is very elegant and is definitely not included in any formal architectural plan. You will notice the patterns on the tent cover. Some are drawn in circles, animals, lightning or stylized figures. Design can represent an individual's vision, family ties, the history of the owner, or a symbol of protection. The hut itself is more than just a refuge. It is a living canvas brimming with memories and meanings, making sleeping in it feel different. You are truly wrapped in stories and prayers, and the murmuring of the paintings and the wind becomes part of the sounds of the night. Historians are still debating whether external observers fully understood the hierarchical meanings of these designs, or whether many early descriptions confused sacred images with simple decorations. In some camps, winter villages are moved to more secluded places. You walk into a river valley where there stand earthen houses, round and solid, like half-minus buried durns. Countries like Mound on Hatsayan Day rebuild these houses with wooden frames covered with willow grass and soil. When the snow falls on the mountain top, it mixes with the soil, turning each hut into a small hill. You pass through a low entrance and feel the difference in the air. Thick walls can retain the heat of the day for several hours. You are basically in a well-minus insulated basement, with the roof just growing out of the ground. Inside, the ceiling rises and above is the central stove. Smoke escaped from an opening, and at the same time, a circle of light entered. The raised platform surrounding the wall is used as a bench during the day and as a bed at night. The fur, woven mats and blankets are all ready. The place where they live is fixed and familiar. You can see how a large family, or several related families, share this space. Each sleep area is respected, and each point is part of a broader pattern. The nights here are shared, but not chaotic. It feels like a planned rhythm. Everyone knows where their head is, so there's no fuss. You notice that the door always faces a certain direction. In many traditions, a small house facing east is very important, welcoming the sunrise and aligning the home with the path of the day. Even in the depth of winter, when dawn is late and the sky is dim, direction is still very important. When you wake up, you will see the first ray of light shooting in near the door, and the light spreads throughout the room. This is a gentle hint to the body that the night is coming to an end. In a small wooden house covered with snow, all the windows were sealed off, making it very difficult to find anything. Further southwest, you will wander in your line to a hogan, a traditional residence often referred to as the Navajo people. Houses in winter may be round or polygonal, made of mud smeared logs, with the entrance facing east. There is a small smoke hole on the roof above the central fire pit. When it snows, it covers the outer layer of the earth, adding more insulation and making houses blend in with the land. Inside, Sleeping areas are lined up on the walls, and blankets and sheepskins are layered on the floor. The entire interior feels grounded, close to the ground, and stable. Even the wind outside seemed to be coming from a faraway place. Here, the night ritual shapes sleep. Stories are told in the dim firelight, but some of them are reserved for winter. In some indigenous traditions, sacred stories, especially those about powerful creatures or creations, are only told when snakes and insect are sleeping to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. Winter has become a season for storytelling, and bedtime is shrouded in myths. Imagine yourself lying under a robe, listening to the stories of swindlers, heroes and elves walking in the snow. Once you close your eyes, your mind is filled with images that can easily slide you into a dream. Snow itself becomes a teacher. People who have lived in winter for centuries read it as a book. They know on which snowdrifts it is safe to walk, which depressions hide thin ice, and how to quickly build snow shelters or windbreaks in emergency situations. They know that specific tree lines mean less wind, and specific river bends will form dangerous crust. Sleep selection stems from this kind of cognition. Travelers might choose to build a quick shrub shelter, spread snow blocks on it to enhance insulation, and then curl up beside a small fire, which wastes almost no fuel. This technique won't appear in romantic paintings, but it can keep people alive. You will notice how different the atmosphere is from the makeshift settler cottages. Here, winter is harsh, but it is expected. These cabins were designed with this in mind. This shape is designed to withstand wind, snow and cold. People's memories of winter can be traced back to their grandparents and great-grandparents. Danger still exists, but accidents have decreased. The children fell asleep listening to the familiar sound, not thinking about what the building would do when the wind direction changed. Each household adjusted the ventilation outlets, added firewood to the fire, and replaced the bedding that had been tested by many seasons. You can find a place along the wall covered with animal skins and blankets. The fire in the center was burning steadily. There was smoke rising from the black circle on the roof. Poles of various shapes crisscross above you. You drape a long robe over your shoulders and feel the warmth brought by the curved walls and the snow outside. The air was filled with the smell of smoke, and animal skins and dried meat. Someone whispered the last sentence of the story, then quiet down. The little house gently froze, not out of fear, but like a living thing relaxing its skin. Close your eyes. The snow outside continued to fall, indifferent and unchanging. In these elaborately designed houses, people breathe slowly and deeply, resting in designs and traditions that have learned how to coexist with winter rather than simply endure it. Your body almost without hesitation kept up with the rhythm. The flames were flickering by the wall. Your thoughts drift with the smoke. In a house that knows how to stand in the storm, your sleep is peaceful and reassuring. Night folds itself until it feels thicker, just as darkness has a bit of weight. You lay under the blanket, listening to the storm, playing an endless solo on the roof, walls and windows. Your body is tired, but your mind is not yet fully ready to shut up. During the long winter, people regard the uneasy edge between wakefulness and sleep as their own space. This is where the story exists. Around a low fire, a dim light, the voice grew deep. Some people start with a simple line that you hear in one from or another in the West. People say that storms like this, it's not just the snow moving outside. You move around on the mattress and adjust the quilt. Suddenly, you are much more alert than you were for seconds ago. The original story was almost comforting. A ranch worker said that he heard the ghost bell of a sled in the heavy snow, even though there was no teen nearby. Like light snow, silent, a true blizzard. All of a sudden, it was like a Christmas parade that had come out of nowhere. Someone swore that they heard the breathing of the horses, the jingling of the harness chains, and the wheels rattling past the hut, being swallowed up by the storm before anyone could open the door. There was no trace left. Your rational brain murmurs to the wind and the fluttering ice crystals. Your irrational mind wrote yourself a note that read, "Don't go out alone." When people speak in this way, they will remember the real events. A snowstorm in January 1888, often referred to as the schoolhouse or children's snowstorm, swept across the northern plains at such a fast speed that many people worked out on their way home from school. Teachers, parents, and children were wrapped in the white outdoors, and some couldn't even see their own doors. Newspapers and letters spread the story all over the country. These facts are cruel and will never leave the memory of the community. Later, people recounted seeing pale figures walking in the snow on silent nights, spotting small figures near school buildings, or hearing cries for help in a storm decades later. You will hear a more interesting but still disturbing story about storm elves' fondness for imitating familiar sounds. A woman trapped under the snow in a thatched house swore that she heard her husband knocking on the door and calling her outside when he was driving far away. She went against her better judgment and opened the door, almost trapping herself. In the morning, the neighbors dug her out and reminded her that if she found a suitable crack, the wind could shake the wooden board and whistle like a person. She agreed, but privately decided that the next storm could knock everything down at once. She hid under the quilt. Then, the conversation gets closer to the world you are about to visit. The world after closing your eyes. People have noticed that in a room filled with smoke, winter dreams feel different. The air there is no longer fresh, and the cold adheres to the walls. Sleep can become heavy and strange. People often say that they dream of walking in an endless white abyss, never reaching the door they know must be nearby. The women described the nightmare of the roof, getting lower and lower when they couldn't move. When the children woke up crying, they saw frosted faces on the window or their hands pressed against the glass from outside. A strange belief suddenly emerged. Some people swear that if you eat too much pork or greasy food before going to bed on a stormy night, you will have nightmares. Others blame certain cheeses or even onions. An old senior insisted that beans and storms equal nightmares. This might be true, and the reason has nothing to do with ghosts, but is related to digestion. In a crowded room, no matter what the goal was, people were talking about their dinner as if it were a spell. Incorrect mixing can lead to incorrect sleep. The boundary between the story and the response mechanism has become blurred. Parents use the blizzard method to prevent their children from wandering around. They say that storm spirits like lost children, or the white lady in the snow will call out the children's names and guide them away. This is terrifying, but also very effective. You can almost hear your exhausted mother thinking, if a ghost story is the only way to keep my child away from the vast prairie in the snow, then let it go. Historians are still debating whether these specific warnings were as widespread as later stories suggest, or whether many of them were invented privately by families and only became legends much later. Religion also ran through the entire night. Hymns and Bible verses echo between the walls. Someone mentioned the heavy snowstorm that hit the East Coast in March 1888 and said it reminded people that even big cities cannot withstand real storms. Another person talked about seeing a halo around the moon and seeing it as a sign that more snow was coming. After such a night, the dream was filled with trumpets, floods and angels in white. They were so bright that it was doubtful, just like snowdrifts dancing in the air. You realize that people often interpret the weather as a kind of information and bring this feeling to sleep. There is also a quieter, almost tender love. Midwives might say that babies born in a snowstorm will always sleep soundly, no matter how much noise there is, because they came into this world through wind and thunder. People noticed which family members snored during the most severe storms, and half-miners jokingly said they were storm blessings. Imagine a person snoring so loudly that they accidentally scared away an imagined ghost and won the informal title of home guard when everyone else couldn't sleep. You finally lay down, your head resting on a flattened pillow. The conversation you just heard filled your thoughts. The fire had burned very low, and the shadows it cast flickered on the ceiling. Suddenly footsteps could be heard in every brook in the woods. Every gust of wind presses the snow against the wall, feeling as if something is prying open the latch. You know the logical explanation. You also know how convincing your imagination is at 2 o'clock in the morning. Sleep is intermittent. 1 second you were listening to the storm, and the next you were right in the middle of it. That disturbing dream made you skip the part of putting on your boots. In your mind, snowflakes are swirling in the air until they switch positions up and down. You see the lights, then the distance. Every time you walk towards them, they disappear. Somewhere behind the fierce wind, you would hear the sound. At first it sounded like someone was shouting, then there was laughter, and then a sound you couldn't put into words. You don't know if your brain is replaying the story you've heard, or just remixing the roars and whistles of the actual storm. When you suddenly wake up and your heart beats fast, you have no idea how much time has passed. The room was dim, the slow grey before dawn. The snowstorm has stopped, but the snow is still gently brushing against the window. Around you, others are sniffing their noses, turning over and muttering to themselves in their dreams. If you listen carefully enough, you can pick out some fragments. They word here, a sigh there. Everyone is watching the storm right under their noses. Slow down your breathing. The more you pay attention, the more ordinary sounds will appear again. The furnace makes a ticking sound when it cools down. A piece of snow gently fell from the roof. A horse was humming in the shed outside. These are not ghosts, not storm spirits, they are just the night music for survival in the hard season. This does not mean that these stories are meaningless. This merely means that they live together with the real world and under the same blanket as the facts. Your eyes are getting heavier again. This time, when you fall asleep drowsily, your brain will seek something calmer. Perhaps it's the memory of summer grass. Perhaps it was the simple rhythm of a lullaby someone was humming by the fireplace. The blizzard law still curls in the corners of your mind, but it has softened. The dream changed from a howling white to something quieter. The storm outside has its own roof. You sleep inside, carrying a mixture of wind, fear, faith and folk tales into deeper darkness. The room has never been completely quiet. Even when the storm subsides and the flames calm down, with the friendly light, there is always a voice that refuses to cooperate. There was a cough, followed by another, and then a long breath of a person whose chest had been quarreling with winter for weeks. Sleeping in this season is not just because of the cold. It's about living in a cramped space. Every time you sneeze, have a fever or feel pain, you walk to the door and decide to unpack. While you were listening in bed, the child on the other side of the room began the familiar pattern. A slight cough followed by a bigger one, then a creaking sound, which made every adult sit up straight. In the 19th century, winter was a high-minus incidence season for diseases, such as pneumonia and bronchitis. Tuberculosis and other diseases have lingered in families and communities for many years. This is an obvious historical fact written in letters, diaries and doctors' reports. Here you can hear the tense breathing, not allowing the night to rest. Someone stood up, wrapped their shawl tightly around their shoulders and stood barefoot on the cold floor. The first line of defense is simply warmth. Put another log into the stove. The blanket should be inspected and straightened. An extra shawl is draped over the small shoulders. In a world without antibiotics or inhalers, people first rely on heat and rest. Even if they have to make the whole family revolve around a sick body, they would not hesitate. The bed was moved closer to the fire. The child with a fever was moved to the warmest place, even if it meant that the parents were on the edge of ventilation. The next step is to fix the frame. The boundary between medicine and the kitchen is always interesting. You see a small can of ointment appear, which smells like camping supplies and rosin. When the strong smell filled the entire room, the chest was rubbed and the skin stung. It is believed that these vapors can open the lungs and clear congestion. Beside the ointment, there is a small bottle of honey and a small bottle of lemon juice or vinegar, which can be mixed into hot water at any time to make a soothing drink, even though it is scientifically ambiguous. The warm and sweet cup and the cold hand of the night are like a little miracle. There is also a bottle. No one would pretend that it is only for emergencies. A cork pops out of a whiskey or brandy jug. An adult can pour a little into a tin cup, mix it with hot water and sugar. If someone splashes in the store, perhaps a slice of lemon can also be added. Hot palm wine is a common night companion here. It is used to relieve coughing, relax muscles and put the stubborn brain to sleep. It can't cure an infection, but it can definitely persuade your brain to relax its control over worry. Historians are still debating whether the frontier residents were or inclined to relieve pain and calm, or to seek simple comfort and social rituals during the long nights. Children don't drink strong alcohol. At least the authorities don't. On the contrary, you might see onion syrup being brewed. Some people slice onions, put a layer of sugar in a jar, and then let it stand until it forms juice. Give a spoonful of that sharp, sweet liquid to treat the cough. It smells like a sandwich and tastes bold, and is deeply loved by some families. There is an even stranger practice of placing hot onion slices on the chest, or even stuffing them into socks before going to bed to get rid of nausea. You glanced at a child with an uneven inkling, then decided that no matter what your own bedtime is, it might be strange. Sleeping for patients and sleeping for others have become intertwined. Every cough can wake up a person who is sleeping lightly. Every time the blanket is changed, the bedrobe gets dirty. Parents will wake up at the slightest sound made by a feverish child, and then lie there staring into the darkness until the noise stops for a long time. You can recognize the expression of someone who hasn't slept well for weeks. With his eyes clouded and his movements sluggish, he still got up every morning to cut firewood and carry water. The ready miners made medicine also sneaked into the room quietly. By the end of the 19th century, bottles with bright labels were transported by train to the West, promising to treat coughs, headaches and insomnia with secret formulas. Many of them contain alcohol, opium derivatives, such as laudanum or potent stimulants. Adding a few drops of sodium to a cup of water can relieve pain and help restless patients fall into a deep sleep. Use it carefully. Some people are very confident about it. If not used carefully, it may become a silent problem in a house where everyone just wants to stop coughing long enough to rest. You watch an insomniac farmer pacing up and down on the floor, holding a cup in both hands and hunched over his shoulders. It's not always illness that keeps people awake. The pain from long working hours, arthritis exacerbated by the cold, and worries about crops, debts and the weather all accompany them to bed. Insomnia is not a modern invention. The letters of this period were filled with complaints about being unable to sleep and about the mind still beating even when the body was exhausted. People try all kinds of methods, from reciting scriptures to counting the whistles of distant trains, to relax their minds. A strange little program unfolded in a corner of a lamp. An elderly woman swore that warming her feet with hot salt in a pot and then putting on socks knitted by a relative could guarantee a better dream. Another person believes that putting the Bible under the pillow can prevent nightmares. Some people rub cut potatoes on their foreheads to relieve headaches, and then place the potatoes on the windowsill overnight, believing that it will relieve the pain. None of these habits appear in formal medical books, but they fill the quiet space at night, which official treatments cannot achieve. Sometimes the most effective remedy is to rearrange one's body. A panting grandfather was moved to a grandson who could sleep anywhere, hoping that his easy rest would be erased. A woman was constantly worried about her son on the way. She was pushed between two sisters, who whispered to each other until her breathing slowed down. In the crowded winter dormitory, there was no feeling of struggling alone at 3 in the morning at all. If one person is pacing while awake, it's very likely that the other two will also accidentally get up, ready to pour him a drink, tell him a story, or complain together about the absurdity of waking up again. The line between beneficial sleep and dangerous sleep may be very thin. If a person with a severe infection becomes very quiet and stops coughing, family members will closely observe whether their chest is still rising. They touch their foreheads with the backs of their hands. Listen to the changes in breathing. Every sound, every shift is meaningful. In a world without monitors and hospital wards, night shifts are right by the bedside. Listen attentively with your beloved in the dark, and the rhythm will eventually reappear. The fever subsides, the cough eases, or in the most severe cases, the family mourns and moves on, as they have no luxury of stopping. For now, on this special night, the medicine has done what it could. Herbal fruit, hot drink to relax tense muscles. Local rituals can calm restless thoughts. The cough lessened to an occasional murmur. The rhythm has stopped. When people were relocated, a stream appeared on the bed for the last time. You feel your own body conforming to this sense of stability. The air was still filled with the smell of wood smoke and a hint of whiskey. Somewhere in the room, a kettle was quietly simmering on the stove just in case. Your eyes become heavy, and the uncomfortable sounds shrink to small dimensions and long breaths. Sleep is not a dramatic rescue but a slow and steady drift, pulled in by warmth. The worry has finally been exhausted. The simplest wish of human beings is to rest, even in a winter that seems determined to test every part of you. The storm no longer seems like a major event, but begins to resemble a roommate who is reluctant to move out. Day after day, heavy snow blanketed the small town until the roads vanished, the fences disappeared, and the horizon narrowed down to the street outside the window. Standing in front of the frosted glass of a narrow room in a boarding apartment building, you realize that this small town is more than just quiet. It is sealed. There were no mail vans, no trucks, no train whistles, nothing at all. Only a few buildings are shrouded in white. The atmosphere downstairs has changed. At first, being trapped at home by the heavy snow felt very interesting. Extra sleep, extra coffee. Everyone is talking about how wild these drifts look. But as the days passed, the nerves began to tense up. People began to pace. A person who speaks too loudly when playing cards. You hear a door close, and its power is just enough to tell you that the person behind the door needs a new personality or needs to walk a certain distance. It's impossible to go anywhere. Confinement sickness is a phrase you often hear, usually said with a smile, and it sounds very tiring. You walk to the corridor and follow the sound to the common room. The boarding housekeeper took out everything that distracted her. A deck of greasy playing cards is shuffled between hands. The chessboard is placed on the crate. Her dilapidated violin was leaning against a chair. Newspapers and old letters were read over and over again, until everyone could remember every advertisement. In the corner, a man dozed off on the upright chair for the third time today. You've never seen anyone treat sitting up as a personal sport. Food has become a common anxiety and joke for everyone. The flours spread out more thinly. There is no sugar in the last few pies. The coffee becomes weaker and weaker as it is brewed. People talk about the famous winters trapped by heavy snow, such as the difficult seasons in parts of Dakota in 1880 and 1881, when trains couldn't pass for months and people had to grind wheat seeds to make flour. This is a real event, not just a story. Realizing this made the half-empty flour bucket in the kitchen feel much more serious. Even if everyone still jokes about inventing invisible soup for dinner, lack of exercise will erode the edge of sleep. Where you don't go far or work hard outside, your body won't lie firmly in bed as usual. In the evening, people tossed and turned on the narrow beds, staring at the ceiling they had already memorized. In the morning, some of them overslept, trying to let time pass. Some others wake up before dawn, their minds buzzing, wandering along the corridors just to catch a glimpse of another wall. Historians are still debating whether the term reclusive fever refers to a truly definable mental state of that era, or is mainly a poetic way to describe boredom, anxiety and a bad temper, all crowded in the small ruins of winter. You visited a small grocery store, which has become the default social center. The master keeps the stove burning for as long as possible every day without locking the door. Part of the reason is that in such towns, trading posts and shops often serve as post offices, news repositories and gossip stations. People slipped and just stood by the fireplace, exchanging the same story they had told yesterday with new embellishments. It was announced that the snow had officially reached the abdomen of the horse eyed outside. Others swore that Liz's view of the entire situation was now over. Any joke will do, as long as the complaint doesn't become too sharp. A strange game appeared around the stove. People began to bet on when they would hear the whistle of the next train or see the first carriage break through the snow. They scribbled down their guesses on a piece of paper. There was no special reward, only pride and entertainment. As the storm continued, the date was getting later and later. A child participated in the flower minus picking activity in spring with great enthusiasm. Everyone laughed, and then there was a moment of silence when they realized that the child might not have been completely wrong. In a small house on the edge of the town, the retreat fever takes on a different form. You see a family rearranging the furniture for the third time within a week. This bed and the table are swapped. The trunk was moved to a new corner. This change is mainly symbolic, but it can deceive the brain into feeling that something is happening. The children's lidden shouted on the floor, stepping on the grain bags. It was not until someone hit the stove that the mother declared the game over forever. The story is repeated. Meaningless quarrels will break out quickly and disappear just as quickly. Facing the same 5 faces for 24 hours a day will make every little habit stand out even more. The sleep pattern also breaks here. A child began to secretly take a nap behind a pile of wood in the afternoon, vanishing an hour of hidden silence. Father woke up in the night, sat by the window, watched the snowflakes glow slightly under the moonlight, and thought about the spring plowing that he could never reach. Mother began to do housework at strange times, as if washing the pots at midnight might waste time. No one can get that kind of deck rest that can rejuvenate them. This is just a short stretch of sleep between the extensions of restlessness. In the city, pubs have become another pressure valve. Even in bad weather, if people can stagger across the road, they will do so. On a table, the cards were slapping at a steady rhythm. In another place, someone plucked the violin, played it aunt's tune, and invited anyone with energy to stomp the few steps on the wooden floor. With each jump, the building swayed gently. For an hour or two, people laughed loudly, drowning out the lingering thought that they would walk home through the same snow, back to the same crowded rooms. Alcohol flows. The voice of conversation gets louder and louder, and sometimes one's temper also becomes irritable. Spilled drinks, wrong cards played. When there are too many witty remarks, the fist will fly away. 5 minutes later, the same men might help each other and apologize because they have nowhere to go and they still have to meet tomorrow morning. The tone of the church gathering also changed. The Sunday service turned into a combination of worship, community registration, and informal town meetings. People pray for clear skies and safe trips. They also exchanged information, such as which families were short of supplies and which families might need help digging up their rooftops or underground doors. Imagine yourself sitting on a hard bench, holding a hat in your hand, trying hard not to think about the same footprints your boots left between the hut and the church. After such days, sleep might be strange, filled with dreams of the path to a new place. Historians are still debating whether the border towns were really surrounded by heavy snow for as long as later novels described, or whether several unforgettable storms lingered in people's memories, adding color to the memory of the entire season. In any case, those areas that had been closed for a long time all left their marks. The surviving letters tell of the passage of time, of the feeling of being written about, and of the joy when the first visitor came to the town with such difficulty as a walking message from another planet. Now, you lie on the mattress in the boarding apartment, feeling trapped in this tidy little world. The walls are very close, not because they have moved, but because your mind is spinning around the same idea. Supplies, weather, boredom minus every night, it's the same 3 stories. However, even here, a little comfort will quietly arrive. Someone in the next room kept humming a tune while getting ready to sleep. The rustling sound of a chair came from downstairs. The landlady was carefully wiping the fire, just as you hear every night. You pulled the quilt to your chin and listened as the murmuring voices gradually faded away and the wooden board creaked under the footsteps of the last group going to bed. The snow outside enclosed the small town, but it also kept out many noises and dangers from the outside world. In a few hours, your world shrinks to just one building, a mattress, and a group of people breathing slowly in the dark. Claustrophobia may affect everyone, but when you close your eyes, your body takes advantage of this quietness and enters any state of rest it can ask for. When winter firmly controlled the town, heavy snow flattened the main street until it seemed almost real. If you don't know the situation, you'll think that nothing bad has ever happened here. The light streamed in from several windows, creating golden islands in the white. There was a sign somewhere. Everyone else in the town held their breath. Nights like this belong to those who can't sleep others. You stand at the door of the sheriff's office, shaking off the snow from your hat. The room was filled with the smell of cheap tobacco, aged coffee and wet wool. A large minus-bellied stove is best placed in a corner. Several posters are hung on one wall. The faces in memory. The eyes always seemed to calm when it came to the rewards printed below. The sheriff was sitting at an old table with boots on his feet. The chair was tilted backward in a special way, indicating that he was both relaxed and ready to act. You noticed that his gun strap was hung within reach instead of on a hook at the other end of the room. By the 1870 seconds and 1880 seconds, Many Western towns had formal legal personnel whose titles were sheriff, marshal, or sheriff. Sometimes it's an election, and sometimes it's employment. This is an undeniable historical fact, not merely a novel decoration. Their job description is very simple. It's very painful in winter. Maintaining order, collecting taxes and fines, managing prisons, and staying awake while others are snoring under the covers. Tonight, the storm added another layer. Heavy snow means less street brawls and more worry about trapped passengers. The wandering livestock and the opportunistic thief thought no one could see through them. The sheriff was pouring coffee from a charred pot, which must have led a hard life. You accepted a cup and found it strong enough to walk on its own. A hot and bitter liquid slides down your throat, and your nerves buzz, making you feel as if sleeping is something that happens to someone else. This is what I think. Here, the law enforcement officers rely on coffee, just as sailors rely on ropes. There is a joke that some sheriffs seldom drink anything, either cooked beans or distilled stuff, depending on the time. Two narrow cells occupied the rear of the room, with their doors facing the stove. None of the prisoners here are charming robbers. Hainan was snoring in bed, still wearing his boots, and was locked up because of his noisy drunkenness. Another person was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, and was arrested for fighting or not paying a fine. The bunk is very thin, the standard issue and ungenerosity of the blanket. Sleeping in a border prison is not for comfort, rather. It's more about giving you a specific place to suffer. You can feel the through wind sneaking into the prisoners through the iron bars, and you won't envy them. In the corner on the sheriff's own small bed, a strange sight catches your attention. Under its feet lay a tin plate, inside which was a small bell. If he had to lie down and cover his eyes with his hat, he would place the heel of one of his boots on the plate. Any sudden movement or attempt to stand up will trigger it, causing the bell to ring loudly and wake it up immediately. This is a self-made alarm system because I slept too many nights when someone needed to look after me. You know this person sleeps like a cat, right? One ear is always pressed against the door. Outside, heavy snow was falling and the sound of hooves was loud. This is a mixed bag. Fewer passengers mean fewer strangers coming to the city, but it also means that the sound won't go far. If someone decides to slip along the alley behind a bank or a hardware store, there won't be a sharp sound of hooves to expose them. The sheriff shrugged his shoulders, nodded at you, and then pushed the car into the night to pay the bill. You followed behind, your boots sinking to your calves, breathing in the thin clouds under the light. You passed through the dark front hall of the tavern, with the windows faintly glowing. Inside, some regular customers were still leaning against the bar counter, but the noisiest crowd either went home or fainted under the tables. The bartender raised one hand to greet. For night, he is an unofficial representative. One eye was fixed on the wine, the other on anyone who seemed to be causing trouble. Historians are still debating whether many border law enforcers are firm defenders of justice, or more like actual managers of local sentiments, balancing legal, political and commercial interests when necessary. No matter what the answer is in the city, you can see a secret alliance between police badges and bars. Walking down a small street, a lantern was swinging around outside a small express delivery company. The sturdy boxes are placed inside, waiting for the transportation stage that may or may not arrive tomorrow, depending on the drift. This kind of cognition attracts another type of insomniac. Somewhere outside the town, in a secluded canyon or an abandoned shed, lawbreakers attempt to rest. They have their own winter problems. There is no warm stove fed by others. If they are on the run, there is no solid roof. Nor can it be guaranteed that the bouquet will not decide to ride under the moonlight. You imagine such a hideout, a dilapidated hut with its door half open, mended with saddles and nailed planks. Inside the room, 2 or 3 people were crowded around a small fire, their faces shining with orange shadows. They spread the bed sheets on the floor with their backs against the wall, so that no one slept with their feet facing the door. This is a habit because one doesn't want to be pulled out in an accident. If anyone wants to close their eyes, the gun is placed within easy reach, cleaned and inspected. Sleep here is thin and tense. Outside, even a gust of wind sounds like the hooves of horses. Every crack that fire emits may become a footprint. A fugitive insisted on sleeping in his boots, even though his toes complained, because if someone barged in, he refused to lose a second. Another person stuffed a chair under the door handle and tied a rope from the chair to his wrist. Home alert, no, for they argued quietly about who was on duty, whose seat is warmer. Last night, he dreamed that he was riding in the wilderness with no one chasing him. When he woke up, he was angry and thought it was just a dream. In such a camp, there is a strange little superstition circulating. Some men refuse to sleep with hats on, claiming that hats will trap bad luck or lock nightmares in their skulls. Put the hat on the top and place it near the bedspread. Never fall onto the floor, for someone has said that doing so will splash out your luck. You glanced at the circle of worn-out hats and realized that even lawbreakers would stick to some small rituals. Because the winter night was long and the law made people feel very uncomfortable. Back in town, the sheriff finished his inspection and returned to his office. A police officer, half asleep and half awake on a chair, blinked his eyes until he heard the report. Everything is quiet. Where there shouldn't be lights, there are no lights. There are no new traces around the bank. Another pile of fuel was added to the stove. The documents were haphazardly placed on the table, mainly to stay alert. In some towns, the sheriff still manages the telegraph office at night. Eavesdrop on the information of wanted criminals or goods. The ticking of Morse code in the next room might be the difference between a peaceful night and a bouquet of flowers quickly organized in the cold. You were sitting on a hard chair, trying to rest but not wanting to fall asleep. You nodded, then suddenly raised your head and nodded again. The warmth of the stove wrapped around your legs, but your hands still felt the bite of the earlier wind. A person in the drunken shelter let out a snoring sound, which sounded like that of a small animal. Outside, the snow was gently tapping on the window, sliding down slowly and warily. The world stands still. Somewhere in this silence, a rider might be trying to advance towards the town, with his coat frozen over and in urgent need of shelter and a dry bed. Elsewhere, the observation deck here might hear the faint jingling of spurs that don't belong here. These possibilities leave law enforcers hovering between wake of signals and sleep, never fully engaged in them. The rest of the people were small pieces, with only half of their boots off and their guns at hand. They would open their eyes wide at the slightest false sound. You feel that your body is imitating this pattern. The chin sinks towards the chest. Then, a tiny voice startled you again. The sheriff's alarm bell didn't ring. The stove hummed. Snow kept building soft walls around the town. For a few minutes each time, you are drifting, with your eyes closed, still alert enough that a real shout, or a real crash, will immediately pull you up. Lawbreakers and magistrates may be on opposite sides of the law, but in such winter storms, they have a strange common point. For waiting for footsteps in the snow, both of them tried to fall asleep. You woke up blinking on the narrow bed, and for a second you couldn't remember which town you were in. The ceiling looks no different from those of other boarding houses you have seen this winter. A wooden board soiled by old holes. A smoke shadow near the chimney. Then the chorus began. Snoring came from the left. Another one came on the right. Someone let out a soft sigh, and then a low clanging sound came from the room downstairs. Do you remember sharing your dreams with strangers tonight? The children in the next room have just begun to settle down. Their long boots and stockings were bent into a row by the stove to dry, giving off a smell of wool and wet dogs. They live here because they usually sleep at the school, a building with only one room outside the city. Is too flinching and hard to reach. This boarding house has turned into a makeshift cemetery. The corridor is filled with giggles, soft arguments, and the common sound of a child insisting that they are not tired, but their eyelids do not think so. A little boy was dragging his stroll close to the wall, right under a window with cracks filled with rags. His sister patted the mattress, smoothed it out, as if it were something more luxurious than it actually was, and then stuffed him into a patchwork quilt. In many rural communities in the border areas of the 19th century, brothers and sisters not only had to share household chores, but also sleep together until they were teenagers or even older. This is an obvious historical fact, whose root cause lies in the scarcity of beds and the cost of materials. Privacy is a peculiar concept rather than a nightly expectation. On the other side of the room, the school teacher spread out her simple bed by the door. She was very young, wrapped in a simple flannel nightgown and with her hair tied up in braids. Ready to go to sleep, teachers here often stay away from their families and work in remote areas. Their living arrangements are called boarding. This means that during the semester, she has to rotate between different families, and the community decides where she sleeps. For a month, she shared a room with her 3 daughters. Another month passed and she slept in a small bed in a narrow corner of the guest room. Tonight, when the storm blocked the way, she finally checked into a room in a boarding apartment, along with all kinds of children travelers, and a sewing machine that would creak even if no one touched it. She covered the shawl with the thin quilt and checked the small stack of books beside the pillow. Arithmetic, introductory books, and the Bible were all piled up like a miniature wall between her and the rest of the ring. It's not many, but it marks that a small island belongs to her. Historians are still debating whether frontier teachers enjoy a respected semi-independent life, or whether they have always felt constrained by strict community expectations and isolation, which affect them most at night. No matter how she keeps her balance, you can see 2 clues. One is that she acts with a calm authority, and the other is that when she thinks no one is looking at her, her shoulders droop due to fatigue. On the bed next door was a shop clock bought from the dry goods store downstairs. He is also very young, but the wrinkles under his eyes indicate that the winter storage and long working hours are not good. He rolled over, with his back to the others, trying to squeeze a bit of loneliness out of the shared air. In many developing western towns, boarding houses are the default accommodation for unmarried workers. It was crowded with shop assistants, miners, railway workers and traveling salesmen. Rooms are usually separated by thin plate walls which can block both their flow and sound. If the person separated by 3 doors coughs, laughs or whispers a secret, you might still be sleeping in the same bed. Near the ceiling hangs a strange detail. A drying rack was installed above the stove on the ground, on which mittens of fingers, scarves and sometimes damp textbooks swayed all night long. From time to time something would loosen and fall down, causing one of the children to make a squeaking sound. The teacher whispered to them that nothing supernatural had fallen from the rafters, it was just socks. On a particularly cold night, she placed a pot of potatoes on the stove and slowly roasted them in the embers. In the morning, they serve as both breakfast and hand warmers, and are stuffed in the pocket on the way to school. The sleep arrangements of each family are different. In a farmhouse on the edge of the small town, a teacher and her teenage daughter share a bed. The 2 of them lay as straight as planks to avoid bumping into each other. In another family, she placed a straw tick in the attic. If she sits too fast, the low crossbeam will gently pat her forehead. Elsewhere, she squeezed into a corner of a rotating bed pulled out from under the master bed of the family. In a crowded house, pushing the bed is a common trick. At night, it slides out like a secret drawer and disappears during the day. Imagine that you were gobbling up your food, and the strange feeling is just like a book sliding onto the bookshelf. Children have their own sleep games. A whispered ghost stories about the closet at the end of the fall or the wind in the chimney. Some insisted that it was the sound of loneliness. Parents and teachers have spent a lot of energy balancing discipline and comfort, trying to prevent bedtime from becoming completely chaotic. There are regulations regarding quiet time, about not crawling into the wrong bed, and about not using a night pot as an excuse for midnight social activities. You will hear a girl bargaining for another story, and her tired caregiver will firmly respond, if you can still speak. You can also help carry water. This is a cutting mine, a sedge version of the lullaby, and it works surprisingly well. In mining towns or railway camps, the rooms and boarding houses are even more crowded. You can imagine a room filled with iron boxes, each not much larger than a person, and covered with neatly arranged blankets. If there is no other space, the teacher might eventually live here. She's only 1 row of beds. Snoring becomes a shared experience because of a thin partition or a hastily hung curtain. Some people are talking in their sleep in a distant corner, while others are grinding their teeth. It turned into a strange lullaby of human voices. You will find that despite the steady background chorus, you still doze off in a daze. Not every child sleeps with their family. Trains from eastern cities to western communities often place children in new families. These young travelers often spent the night at stations or boarding places along the way, sharing a bed with other children they had just met. They lay on the bed, listening to the sounds of strange buildings, not knowing where they would end up. This history is complex and sometimes painful, but it is part of who curls up in the blanket on these snowy nights. You lay down and felt the room quiet. The stove made a soft bang. The landlady carefully saved her money before going to bed. She believed that she didn't have to get up before dawn unless the wind direction changed. The teacher blew out the lamp, leaving only faint embers. The children murmured to themselves for the last time. Then came silence, at first hesitation, and then more thoroughly. This is not a perfect silence. The floor creaks when someone turns over. Some people snore, then stop, and then start anew with new ambitions. The clerk murmured half-minus awake, half-minus asleep words about the ledger column. One of the little boys sobbed and then patted his sleepiness to calm him down. However, behind all this lies a gentle rhythm. Share the breath, share the warmth, share the awareness until the road is clear and the turn of office comes to an end. These people are the ones you will share your bed with every night. You pull up the blanket and let your thoughts drift. Somewhere in the cold, in a separate hut, there was a group of restless children and tired adults. Here, thin walls and many beds create a makeshift, small community wrapped in wooden snow. Your eyes slowly close. Your body tucks itself into the shape of a narrow mattress, and you let the snoring sigh. The stranger's sluggish music turned into a lullaby. Winter can freeze this town. You can still fall asleep peacefully after staying in this shared room for several hours. The sky finally recalled a color other than white. It wasn't much, just a pale blue near the horizon, but it felt as if someone had broken a window in the season. The streets and fields are still covered with thick snow, but the air has changed. When you walk outside, you will feel it on your cheek. The cold is still bone-minus chilling, but not as bone-minus chilling as before. Just like winter has let go of one finger, but still cares about the other. Tonight isn't the first time it's snowing, nor the worst one, but it feels like it's over. The snow crust softens, melts and freezes again, until it falls onto buildings instead of attacking them. Icicles extended from the eaves and then began to drip water a few warm hours before dusk. You stand at the door of a small house, watching a drop of water from the top, catching a brief flash, and then vanishing into the snow. It is a small, shining reminder that spring is still somewhere on the calendar. Internally, people's ways of activity vary. No one is as panicked about fuel as they were a month ago. The wooden pile was still guarded by someone, but when someone reached out to take the wood, that tense and worried expression lessened. In communities that endured the coldest winters of the 19th century, such as the prolonged storms in parts of Dakota in 1880 and 1881, the last few weeks were filled with equally cautious exhalation. The worst is over, but everyone knows that another cold wave may still come uninvited. Every little move you made tonight made you feel both relieved and skeptical. The bed was made as usual, with quilts piled up layer upon layer and wrapped in hot bricks. But the way people crawl in has a gentle touch. Months of disrupted sleep have left them exhausted. They won't go to bed like soldiers facing another battle. They slid into the bed, just like swimmers slowly entering water that had finally calmed down. You pulled up your blanket and found that you weren't wearing as much as before. Pajamas are still necessary, but perhaps you only need a pair of socks instead of two. This was a minor rebellion. The children are the first to sense the change, and it seems that they always do so. They woke up very early. No one called them. They pressed their noses against the window and announced that the snow was getting lighter. When they went to bed tonight, they were still very tired as they paced back and forth in the wet mud and climbed up the snowdrifts that had already begun to droop. A child fell asleep halfway through telling the story, still holding a stick in his hand. While exploring the constantly changing scenery, he used it as a fake measuring stick. You quietly pulled it out from his weak fingers and placed it by the door. It was a relic of the upcoming muddy season adventure. A strange family tradition emerged during dinner. Some people claim that this is the last real winter stew of the season and throw all the remaining root vegetables into the pot. At the dining table, this became a popular joke. Every spoonful is a guess about the plot of the next season. Potatoes represent a good harvest. Carrots ensure the health of animals. The last little radish is clearly a sign that someone in the family has finally stopped snoring. Everyone mocks this, especially those who snore the loudest. For a moment, you could feel the tension vanish like steam rising from a bowl. After the dust settled, the topic turned to the plan. Plow the land, repair the fences, and inspect the paths after the ground is solid. To the railway town, people are speculating about new schedules, new crew and embers and more freight. The long winter turned the restless men and women into their own thoughts. Tonight, their thoughts once again extended outward. What followed was a different kind of fatigue, less afraid and more eager. Historians are still debating whether the frontier people romanticized these winters in their later lives or whether the sense of victory at their end truly masked the tragic nature of the long nights. No matter what the truth is, you can see how easy it is to remember tonight and forget the worst part. Sleep gradually descended, but not as sharp and anxious as it was at the center of the storm. You lie on the mattress listening to the sound of a small town, which is already contemplating the things of spring. The roof dripped in the afternoon and then froze again at midnight, making a faint jingling sound as the gentle breeze brushed against the icicles. Somewhere in the distance, when someone was testing a rough road, the wheels of a carriage creak. The wind is still there, but it has lost some of its bitterness. It doesn't sound like a threat, rather, it's more like a tired traveler talking to himself. You will notice that few people get up at night to look after the fire. The stove is still important, but the stakes have shifted. If the embers drop a little before dawn, it means an uncomfortable moment rather than an emergency. Out of habit, a person stood up and stood there for a while, placing his hand on the stove cover, realizing that the room was not as cruel as before at this moment. But anyway, they still added fire to the fire, not so much out of fear as out of routine. Then they slipped back onto the bed, with a small smile on their faces, saying that the worst time of the season was over. Dreams themselves can make people feel relaxed. The endless white nightmare gave way to the muddy streets, the flooded ditches and the first green leaf emerging from the remaining snow. You might find yourself dreaming of taking off your coat, but forgetting where you put it. Sitting on the dry porch steps, facing the sun, walk to the barn without holding the rope. Even worry can change the taste. Rather than worrying about whether the roof can still hold up in the next storm, it's better to start worrying about the planting date and the lost tools. It's important that you traded one set of questions for another, but they are warmer questions. Finally, you closed your eyes. Your body bears the entire strange winter, layers upon layers of clothes and nights, and the same bed. Fires and storms at night. Coughing occurs at night and one can't sit still. However, at the edge of this quiet season, these memories began to soften. You feel that the bed beneath your feet is solid and familiar. You feel the blanket covering you, heavy and intimate. Outside, along the fence and the roof line, the snow was still piling up thickly, but the hope of change has quietly permeated the air. Inhale slowly and exhale even more slowly. The muscles relaxed in a way they hadn't seen in weeks. The sounds of the houses around you, the deeper sighs of someone lying in the pillow, the faint woods and streams relaxing, becoming gentle rather than shocking. The arrival of sleep is not like suddenly falling into darkness, but rather like one lamp after another gradually dimming until there is enough shadow in the room to rest. You drift there, caught between the memory of the bone minus chilling wind and the hope of a gentler morning. Finally, you slept through a winter night. It didn't feel like an enemy, but more like a long story, and you finally reached the last page. The wind outside first calms down in your mind, even though it still lingers around the roof, shaking some loose planks. The version you are hearing now is softer, just like the last song on the playlist will automatically turn down the volume. You lay in the half-minus dark room, feeling the weight of your blanket and the weight of all the nights you had just wandered in your imagination. You imagine those log cabins and thatched huts, bunkhouses, taverns and dörfen huts, prisons and boarding houses. Each one is hidden beneath its own weather-minus beaten roof. Everywhere, there are people who finally settle down, stretching out their tired hands and closing their stubborn eyes. The storm may rage or murmur, but within their city walls, they have done their best. The fire was piled up, the door was locked, and the coltoned robe were spread out flat and warm. All that remains now is simplicity and tenderness. Just breathing, just resting, If your own day is long, you can let it join them. Let your thoughts drift over those snow-covered streets and withered lanterns. Then let them move around less. In your mind, you can use some soft things to replace the cold, sharp edges. Perhaps it was the sound of a rocking chair, perhaps the faint hissing sound of firewood sinking into the embers, or perhaps the sound of someone humming a tune in another room. No matter which sound makes you feel the safest, you can turn it up and make the other sounds disappear. It was nothing for you to fix now. In a snowstorm, there are no trains to catch under the starry sky. There are no cattle to look after. There is no stove that only you can look after. Those belong to other nights and others, and their stories are also being passed down. Tonight, you can do something very old and simple. You can stay warm, quiet and sleepy. So, loosen your chin. Let your shoulders sink into what supports